Yo, what up, my vibrational explorers? Today I wanted to hit on drugs, not just drugs, but like mind or conscious altering substances. Maybe consciousness altering substances. One of them, whichever you prefer. So that's going to include things like weed, mushrooms, alcohol, and even coffee. Boy. Somebody's license plate. So the reason I wanted to hit up on this video was because there's a lot of talk. I mean, even masturbation of things that we should or shouldn't do because it'll alter or lower or raise our vibration, the average resting frequency of our consciousness, which is what creates and interprets our experience. Just if you didn't know, really quick, the way it creates our experience, this average resting frequency, it's the way we understand the way the world works around us. Yeah. So if I have certain beliefs, let's say that I have the capacity and will to overcome and get through obstacles, then any obstacles that come my way, I will do my best to overcome them and get through them within the oscillating frequency. So the low at my lowest, and then at my highest. At my lowest being fucking trudging through it, at my highest being crushing my goals or whatever. But even within that frame, you get a certain sense of struggle that comes with that vibration. So if I believe that I can get through it, there's a sense of there needing to be a struggle to reinforce and validate your beliefs and your experiences. Something like this. Likewise, if you identify with sad shit, or as a sad, lonely person, the way you interact with the world around you is going to be from that filter. And so people will subconsciously, unknowingly feel that off of you. They'll be able to see that with or without their own awareness, and adjust themselves to you accordingly. So a lot of the interactions that we have or don't have with others often reinforce what we already believe. So to change that, you would have to come to it with a certain sense of presence and awareness of how you usually or typically are, and make different decisions. And it's something that you just feel okay, this is where I would usually say such and such thing, or withhold my presence, my voice, by not saying such and such thing. In which case, it's good to lower your filter a little bit. Where things like alcohol, liquid courage, like cocaine, I'm not into that stuff, but you do you. Psychedelics, coffee, weed, fucking yoga. I mean, we're sticking more with substances here, but there are so many things that inhibit or liberate our presence And when we're talking about consciousness and vibration, we're talking about presence. That's the practical applicability of your or someone else's presence. That's how you can, read their energy, and just navigate the world around you. Is like the short and sweet of that. But oftentimes, and just something to help you remember this is, what is it? Today's medicine is tomorrow's poison, or like, what? There's another one. It's something about like that which liberated you is going to be what also incarcerates you. It's essentially the same thing with like the thing that gets us out of one thing ends up being like the new addiction. And that's kind of been my experience as I've been experimenting with this, going from a very self-destructive belief set, a very destructive matrix system, and doing psychedelics and having that expand the crap out of my awareness and consciousness. And by that I mean, when people say expand consciousness and awareness, it means that you now understand and see why it is that you do certain things the way that you do them. So for me, like the self-destructive mindset, smoking cigarettes is, part and parcel with a self-destructive or just destructive mindset and belief system. And by self-destructive, I mean self-defeating, self-deprecating is on, if you think of it like a spectrum, it's on that spectrum. And so the more I started to orient myself, my inner compass, more towards self-understanding, self-compassion, self-love, the more I naturally drifted away from the self-destructive stuff. But it's not something that happens overnight, let me tell you. Because there are a lot of things that I know conceptually in like a very thinky prefrontal cortex kind of way that has yet to be embodied. And by like how that happens is through experience and repeated experience, because what we've known to date is based off repeated experience. Any belief that you've had since childhood served you in childhood, served you in that home environment, but may not be serving you now. And so drugs or certain substances or certain practices like breathing and yoga and meditation and stuff have helped me for sure to the phrasing is raise my vibration, but what that means practically has helped me to see, expand my awareness, to become more aware of how the things that I learned to base my reality, my perspective off of, were not the most helpful at the time. Right, this is childhood, adolescence, teen, early adult years. And what helps deal with the pain, struggle, and suffering of looking back at my life and seeing how much pain there is, how many bad decisions and mistakes there were, because I was, doing my best off of what I had at the time. It helps me to relax and ease the physical tension that is based off the emotional wounds and how thoughts tend to gravitate around those emotional wounds. So with that, what I'm saying is, the more suffering there is, the more you will need to medicate that suffering. Right, so hang on. Low-key flex. No. Yeah, so the more emotional wounding there is, the more need or drive there is to medicate it or do something about it. And a lot of that comes from how vibration kind of etches into reality who you are and who you are being. That in itself, the etching of that vibration into the membrane of this reality is a struggle. It is constant effort, and that can very easily be interpreted unconsciously as suffering, as struggle, as pain, hardship, that kind of thing. And so what a lot of people tend to do is try to medicate that away, try to numb that feeling. And the more, not just aware you can become, the more aware you can become of when that feeling comes on, excuse me, the more you can sit with the feeling of what we can label for now as uncertainty. Uncertainty has a lot of, if you free associate with just the word uncertainty, you can get like anxiety, sadness, depression, doubt, doubtfulness, that kind of thing. Like that whole spectrum of uncertainty. And what a lot of people aren't necessarily proactively doing is learning to sit with and manage their own uncertainty. With uncertainty comes insecurities, and with insecurities comes, not our best self. And with booze, liquid courage, there's a certain sense of pride there, and that rests on a certain frequency. Weed has a lot to do with acceptance, and it helps people get into a state of accepting where they currently are, because especially in the West, in the US today, resting where you currently are or accepting where you currently are is, think of it like War on Christmas. There's like a war, there's a whole slandering, a demonization of being content and happy where you are. There's so much ambition and pride in expansiveness, in growth at the expense of an exploitation of the other. So being happy where you are goes against that, and so it's very much talked down on. But if you think of, what we can consider the old ways of living in harmony and balance with the earth, and also having, certain growth and movement forward, I mean, that's just a whole different mindset than what we're currently used to. And so getting on this path of growing while also being in harmony is deeply uncomfortable, because you're going against what it feels like is the norm externally. And so if you're not okay with going against the grain in that way, that's going to spark a lot of insecurity and uncertainty. Is what I'm doing the right thing? Is it the right way to go about it? It raises a lot of questions, and it makes one question maybe the way they live, maybe the way they have to, or maybe the way they have been, as well as have to. I guess the point of me bringing up substances is to maybe help you orient yourself if you're looking to, if you feel like you hit a ceiling or a plateau, and there's more potential within you that you have yet to access. One of the best ways to access that potential is to learn to sit with uncertainty. And so the things, be it food even, that you use to kind of shoo away that feeling of what can also be interpreted as enthusiasm, as love, as gratitude, as excitement and joy, may currently be interpreted as anxiety, insecurity, fear. There's a certain sense of activation and arousal in the body until you'll feel it, or how you may feel it, and an automatic negative interpretation of it. And so it behooves one to just become aware of, this is like my gentle reminder to you, to become aware of when you're automatically negatively interpreting a situation or a thing. Be it a sensation, like the very subtle sensation that I know I get when I want to smoke weed, or to have a drink, to eat something when I'm not even hungry. To go for coffee is one of my biggest ones. To just sit with it and put it off. Delay that gratification a little bit. And sit with the sensation that comes up, because that sensation is connected to the emotion, and the emotion is connected to the thought. So the thoughts that I'm having are connected to the emotions that I may not even know that I'm experiencing, and that emotion is connected to the sensation. The way I like to refer to it, like my reference point neuro-linguistically, is MEPS, MEPS, mental, emotional, physical, and I would say spiritual, sensational. The physical is like where you feel the sensation. So like right now there's tension up here in my upper chest, lower neck, and then that tension would make me, like, brings to mind, free association, brings to mind burdens that I'm shouldering tension in the lower jaw, mandibles, often has to do with frustration, right? Clenching one's teeth, and being mindful there of the automatic negative interpretation. That's an example that the clenching teeth is automatically frustration or a negative emotion, and seeing on the positive negative spectrum of frustration, let's say frustration is on the negative, what within that energy, things are already coming to mind, it can go towards the light side of the spectrum. So that's like just like thrill, excitement, positivity. What can you do with that feeling of frustration, and orient it being action and momentum of thoughts and emotion, orient it towards the lighter side, and using that energy to fuel our impetus, the initial like propelling forward. There's a word for it. Yeah, sitting with whatever current state you're in, as opposed to medicating it, as opposed to, like, you know, eating chips while whatever is happening is happening. Fair warning though, this sitting with that uncertainty, it will bring up certain things. And when you bring up certain things, it's important to go through them as much as you can. This is kind of like my process, like go through the pain and suffering that I have put off dealing with and going through and processing that I didn't process before, the unprocessed emotional content, as far as I can, and having compassion with myself by indulging in whatever, you know, self-soothing tool or practice that you have. So it's a matter of reframing these substances not as an escape, but as, you know, compassion. And once we start doing that, reality itself starts to shift. And by that I mean the way we looked at things tends to change. So reality shifting can be like, okay, maybe you get crossfaded, mix certain substances, especially mix them with food, so you get like a large dopamine release. There's a term, and I think there's a psychological term for doing this thing, but like, it's like, for me, it would be smoking a cigarette, drinking some sort of caffeinated beverage, and eating a slice of pizza. This was like in my college days. I remember one lady was like, "Damn, you're busy," and I was like, "Thank you." But really, I just had like this intense drive to escape my feelings, and get that very large dopamine release in one concise, precise moment or experience that I could then do over and over and over again. But that's like the biggest indicator that you know you're not necessarily on the right path, is when the cycle of the reward action cycle, the action reward cycle, gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the amount of work it takes to get that dopamine release gets easier and easier and easier. Not the amount of work, like the amount of work lessens. So you start cutting corners, essentially. Right? So for me, that would look like doing wake and bakes, drinking coffee before I'm awake, before I come into my senses, using coffee to wake myself up rather than being awake. Maybe doing breathing exercises. There are a few that I do like in the morning to wake myself up before I get my coffee. So the coffee is used as the reward rather than I don't know, the leverage or the tool itself. And the intention there is to just to be as internally, how do I say this, structured as possible. So I'm not relying on external substances and materials to satisfy things or to create outcomes that can be more that can be done internally. Self-sufficiency itself can be a whole fucking can of worms. Right? No person is an island. There's a balance. There's always a fucking balance. Especially with self-isolation. You can do it to like get your shit together, but then there's a need, a very basic human need for being connected in some way, to some capacity. I would say the takeaway from this is to be aware of that mental, emotional, physical sensation and be very scientific about it. For like the scientific method, we want to be able to observe as objectively as possible what's going on within our experiment, our test subject being ourselves, and see what can orient us towards self-compassion, unconditional love, these higher vibrational states, and having compassion for ourselves when we fall short of the mark or when we are at that lower end of our own vibrational oscillation. Yeah. Hope this helps.